welcome to what feels like the Jason Show, and I apologize, but that's what happens sometimes. So, I don't know if you guys heard this. There was an election. Sometime last week, and it caused some people to get sick. It caused muscle cramps. People are very sore. We've got sore winners and sore losers. And then we've got people who have somehow avoided the plague. So pray for our country and pray for your friends. And then do like Jesus and pray for your enemies. Okay? Because we as believers, here's the beautiful thing, we don't need to go to Canada, or leave the country if we don't like the results, because we are already citizens of a totally different kingdom. Okay, so there's like good news, all right? We're not going to be here forever, and whether it's Donald Trump this time, Hillary Clinton next time, whoever it is, it doesn't matter. They're not going to be there forever either. Okay, your life is not over. The country is not over. It's also not fixed. And it ain't going to be so just because we elected somebody. The only thing that's really going to fix what ails us is Jesus, okay? So we're gonna start and dig in here. We are going through Ezra and Nehemiah, answering all kinds of different questions. You can follow along if you've got your phone and you like to use it. You can use YouVersion. And if you pull it out, you can go down, click in the corner. It'll say More, and you can find events. And so look for the one that says Discovery Church. That's where you're at, by the way. And you'll be able to follow along right there. Now, before we go any further, I just need to briefly touch, because for some reason my screen didn't refresh last week, and some of you had questions. We talked about injustice last week and how to deal with injustice and stuff like that. And there were actually some really good questions that people submitted, and I didn't see them until I went to pull things up and refresh it for this week, and like, oh my word, how did we miss these? So, this is just to do my best. If you weren't here last week, we'll get through this really quick. But one of the questions was, what compels us to do something about injustice? And what should compel us? I don't know what compels you, but what should compel us to do something about injustice is the same thing that compelled Jesus. Though he was God, he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. Instead, he humbled himself and became a servant and obedient even to the point of death. And so Jesus is our example that recognized the injustice of the world we live in and how we are desperate to be saved from our sin. We're going to die if we are not rescued from sin. Okay, and by die, it's not just a physical death, it's a spiritual, eternal death, separation from a good God. And so what compels us is the fact that how things are isn't always how things should be. Or put another way, how things should be isn't always how things are. That's what we said last week. And so what compels us is, if we're to bring good news, that's why we confront and do something about injustice, because there's bad news. Okay, so that's that answer. And then there is another question here. How do we know the difference between fighting injustice and fighting to be right? That is an excellent question, okay? And I don't know if I can actually answer it real well in just a short amount of time. My best suggestion, though, would be, is the injustice that you are warring against, the wrongness of how things are, is it something that God has also warred against? Okay? Because we're in a spiritual battle. It's not just a battle with, if you just want to be right, then you're not warring against what God is warring against, because God is not against people created in his image. Okay, so that's the best gut check I can give you, just kind of off the top of my head. And then the last one that we got last week was this. What do you do with God's command not to avenge ourselves and that he will repay? What do you do with that? That's a good question. And I don't think in any of it last week that we got to the point where we said, you need to go and be belligerent and rude and forceful and mean and all those kinds of things, because those don't look anything like what we were praying for our church this morning. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. So what do you do with God's command not to avenge? You leave it as God's command. When we are addressing injustice, it is not avenging. In other words, avenging implies that there is some kind of punishment doled out, okay? So it's kind of like you're going to get yours. Kids, brothers and sisters do this a lot. Like if one of them gets in trouble and, then the other one looks at their parent and then they catch the eye of their brother and sister and they give them the sneer, like, you just wait. Okay, that's avenging. That's what we're not doing. God can take care of that. But if there's an injustice that's taken place, then we can address that. So anyway, I apologize for not getting those last week and backing up for those of you who weren't here last week, but I felt they were really good questions and we needed to jump on them. So you can follow along on YouVersion. Hopefully you should find it by now. And let's see. We're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 6 and 7 today. And there are a lot of questions that we've been answering, and I think the cool thing about this is this old book, this old story actually talks to us about stuff that we are dealing with now today, okay? And so that's been the coolest thing for me. Today's question is one that maybe, just to kind of get you on board, have you ever struggled to keep pressing on, to keep going through something when you wanted to quit? Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was your kid. Maybe it was like you had a puppy and you're just like, I don't want the puppy anymore. He's just peed on my floor. Let's just get rid of it. I don't want to deal with it. Maybe it's a job and it was a bad situation and, people are out, they're supporting you, saying you need to just stick it out. Things will get better. And they haven't and you just want to quit. You ever been there? Or maybe on the flip side, you've been tempted. You know that you shouldn't behave this way. You shouldn't say those things, go those places, do that stuff. But you just can't stop yourself. You're just like, like, it's like the kid with the marshmallows. Some kids can say no because, they've got self-control. Other kids are like, marshmallows, and they wig out. And they're just going to eat the marshmallows, and they'll deal with the consequences later. I've got both kinds of kids. I've got some who are just like, okay, if you say so, Daddy, and other ones who are like, whoa. Okay? So have you ever fallen into that? Because today's question is simply this. Why shouldn't I just give up or give in? Why shouldn't I just give up or get in? So think of whatever situation you're in. Life is horrible. People are horrible. Circumstances are horrible. Why shouldn't I just get up? Or it's just so hard to do the right thing or to not do the wrong thing or to be this way. Why shouldn't I just give in? Everybody else is doing it kind of stuff. I feel so stupid and lonely. Look, if you've ever asked those questions, it's pretty cool because Nehemiah is going to talk about that today. And just to remind you, giving up is saying no more. I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to finish, okay? So there's some examples of this like jobs. Sometimes you just don't want to do it. Homework. Sometimes you just don't want to do it. Working out, okay? I've regularly said this one. No, I just don't want to do it. I see some of you guys on Facebook, and you're like, oh, I had a great workout this morning. You get up, and you're out at 5:30, and you're running around, you're hot, and you're sweaty, and you're like, oh, I'm not going to be able to walk tomorrow. It's your own fault. I slept. Okay? So I've said no. This is one of those things where I've just given up. Okay? I'm just going to be fluffy. But maybe there's people who've been in the hospital, or they've had some kind of diagnoses. A lot of our people here work in the hospital, and they've run across people who have cancer. And they've discovered after it was in remission for a while that it's back, and they're just like, I'm done. I don't want to go on anymore. Just be finished. Okay? So that's what giving up is. Giving in is the opposite. It's not saying no, it's saying yes. And so you're saying yes to like temptation. I'm going to do that. I'm going to eat that. I'm going to say that. I'm going to whatever it is. And so some of you, Black Friday is coming, okay? And so you've looked at your budget. You're like, we can only spend this much. But you're going to get out there and you're going to look and you're going to see some amazing doorbuster deal because you're one of those weirdos who, again, gets up in the morning. And you're like, but I like it. And your husband or wife is going to be sitting next to you, your friend, and he's like, but you can't afford it. And you're like, I don't care. And so you're going to say yes, and you shouldn't have. You just gave in. Or maybe it's food, it's you've already had your cheat day, but you're going to have another one, that kind of thing. Or maybe it's stuff that's maybe a little more what we would say serious on the spectrum. It's like, no, I'm gonna drink again, or I'm gonna say yes to drugs, or I'm gonna say yes to sex, or I'm gonna say yes to an affair, I'm gonna say yes to whatever it is. You just, you don't understand. I need a break, and so I'm just this once. Okay, if that's where you're at, I just want to tell you, Nehemiah deals with some of these things, and probably, now it doesn't say so, okay, so I'm going to be upfront about that. It doesn't say that Nehemiah wanted to give up. It doesn't say that he wanted to give in. But when you see what he dealt with, you'll probably be able to see how you might be able to deal with your own situation where you want to give up or you want to get in or not give in, okay? So, why is it so hard to decide? Why is it so hard to decide if you should or shouldn't? Okay, I'm going to give you, I just made this up, but it makes sense in my mind, a little equation. Here's what I see at play when I'm trying to figure out if I should give up or give in or if I should not. Okay, number one, the first part of it is desperation. Okay, so how desperate are you? How badly do you want whatever it is? How badly do you want relief? How badly do you want that doorbuster deal? How badly do you want it? Okay? How desperate are you for it? I'm just going to tell you. I went looking for YouTube videos to kind of illustrate this, like, desperate, find me a desperate animal, a desperate whatever. I found one. I almost showed it to you. It was somebody who was driving through like a game preserve, and a monkey jumped on their hood, and they put a banana up in the windshield. It's kind of funny. Like, if I ever go someplace and monkeys will jump in your car, I'm totally doing it, because the monkey was like flipping out. He's like trying to get it, and he'd bump his head into the, and he'd grab it, and then another monkey came, and so it was kind of funny. And then there's other ones that are like, oh my word, you ever seen like a dog trying to get a treat? Okay, it's how desperate you are. Maybe you don't need a banana, you need something way worse, and you're way more desperate. That's going to play into it. Something else that plays into it is this, though. The difficulty. Okay? How hard is it for me to get away with this? That might be the question you're asking. How hard is it for me to deal with this? I can't take it any longer. Maybe you're in a struggling marriage. Okay? You desperately want things to get better, but then you factor in that there's this difficulty of actually living with your spouse. Should I give up? Should I give in? I don't know. Well, these are the things that play right there. You're desperate to get good grades, but class is hard, and the homework takes 3 times as long as you want. I'm just not going to turn it in. Okay, you see how desperate, how difficult, and that's what helps you make your decision. Like, how are you going to respond? So desperation plus difficulty is what causes us or makes us reach a decision point. Okay? And you can look. Jesus kind of followed this. He was so desperate for our salvation and to rescue us that weighed into his decision. And it was so difficult that he actually gave up his life, and he knew it going in. He was tempted along the way. 40 days without food, and he's like, hey, all you got to do is command these stones to be bread, and you could have some food. All you got to do is bow down to me, Satan said. But he knew how difficult it was, and yet he didn't give in. He still made the decision that you and I were worth it. Okay, he didn't give up, and he didn't give in. So this is what I want to encourage you with today. So let's look at Nehemiah. Okay, in Nehemiah, here's where we're at right now. Nehemiah, early in the book, he heard about his people and the walls being broken down and the disgrace that they were in, and it made him upset. And he came and he saw everything with his own eyes. Remember, he went around and he checked everything out at night, and then he got the people, he told them what to do, and then he set an example like we talked about last week. He's like, look, I'm going to make sure that everything happens, and then when there's problems and people are having to sell their kids and their farms and their food and they don't have enough, I'm going to make sure that I feed them. Like, Nehemiah has done what's supposed to happen, and it seems like there'd be a lot of success. I heard about it. I got favor. I made the hundreds of mile trip. I wandered around the city and went, yeah, things are really bad. I rallied the people to put everything together, and they started to. In the meantime, there's opposition, but they haven't overcome. And the wall is built to half its height. Even my own people are fighting against each other, and I've even kind of fixed that. Like, he might think he's on a good track. It's just getting started. Okay, see, some people made it hard for him, and I'm sure people have made it hard for you, so I want to give you 5 reasons that we might wonder if we should give up or give in, and then I want to give you what I see in Nehemiah, 5 potential responses to help you combat that. So, if you got your Bible, if you're following along in YouVersion, go to Nehemiah chapter 6. Okay? Nehemiah chapter 6. And here's what it says, starting in verse 1. Now when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab. Now let me just remind you, we've run into these guys before. They were the ones who were mocking them when they were building the wall. They were the ones who were threatening to tattletale on them when they were building the wall. They're the bad guys, okay? Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, bad guys. They don't want them there. And so when these guys and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall, and there was no breach left, although up to that time I hadn't set up the doors and the gates. So the wall's fixed, but there's no way to keep people out because there's no doors and gates. Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, and they said, come and let us meet together at Hakfirim in the plain of Ono. But they intended to do me harm. And I sent messengers to them saying, I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? And they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them in the same manner. So here's what's going on. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, they're not happy. They're the enemies of Nehemiah and the Israelite people. The walls have been built. The gates aren't set up. The doors aren't there, so they're still not completely secure. And they say, why don't you come down and meet with us? Okay, well, you might not think that's a big deal. Like, hey, you might want to meet with your enemies. Like, it was a good thing when Donald Trump went to the White House, he and Obama talked because, they kind of don't get along, but they got along, or at least we're supposed to believe so. And so, maybe he should go. But Nehemiah realized they intended to do him harm. He's like, look, I'm too busy. Why should I leave what I'm doing to go where you're at? Okay, so one of the things that may give you reason to give in, to quit, to give up. It might be this. You just simply got distracted. Here's Nehemiah. He's doing the work. He's trying to make sure everything's taken care of. He's managing the people. And there's some people who aren't even a part of it, and they're like, hey, can I have a minute of your time? Hey, why don't you come and meet with us? Hey, why don't you, let's have a conversation. Like, let's fix this. And Nehemiah's like, no, that's not what's most important. So, tell me if you can relate to this. Well, don't tell me, but think to yourself. Can you relate to this? You got in an argument with your spouse or your best friend, and you start trying to explain how they made you feel. And they say something that triggers a memory, and it makes you go, that's not what I meant, or that's not what I did, or that's not how it happened. And they're trying to explain, you're trying to just get past this point of you're upset, and you're trying to solve a communication issue, and you get distracted by something they said. And suddenly you're talking about that. Well, that's not what I meant. That's not what I did. That's not how it happened. And now you're instead of solving hey, we're not getting along. Things aren't going real well. Can I help you understand how you make me feel? That's not what I did. You're distracted. You're going to have a hard time. You just want to give up because when those kinds of conversations happen, you find yourself, and we've talked about this before, on a crazy cycle. You just keep going around and around and around. You're never going to get out of it. So you just end up saying, oh, I'm done. I want to quit. Because you've been distracted. Nehemiah was not distracted. As a matter of fact, Nehemiah, here's how you can overcome that. I'm just going to make it as simple as possible. You stay focused. Look at what he says in verse 3. I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave and come down to you? So here's what I want to encourage you to think through. If you're not well, okay, Maybe it's well physically, maybe it's well mentally, spiritually. If you're in a dry season and you're just like, I just don't want to be here, I don't like this, I don't like whatever it is. But you want to get better. What people tend to do when something bad happens is they get distracted by it. See, it doesn't matter. If you've ever dealt with temptation, let me go further, dealt with addiction, and you've said, I'm not going to do that anymore. And you're good for however many days, and then you screw up. What's the first thing that you usually think? I'm never going to get any better. Okay, well, you just got distracted. The best way to continue through that is to stay focused. Because you should never, ever think that you're not going to screw up for the rest of your life again. It's going to happen. But praise God for a God who loves us, and he gave us Jesus, that in spite of our screw-ups, he still loves us. You might be saying to yourself, I don't love me. You got distracted. You need to stay focused on the one who does. Okay, so this is how it works. Nehemiah, he's working. He's building the wall. He's trying to make sure that the gates are set into place and that the doors are set, that the job is completed. And somebody's saying, hey, hold on, can we meet? He's like, no. I need to stay focused on the task at hand. He did not get distracted. So that's number one. Number two, you might want to look a little bit ahead here. And let's read. Start in verse 5. We're in Nehemiah chapter 6 still. Now remember, they did this a bunch of times. It wasn't just a one-time deal. They did it 4 more times. Nehemiah, come meet. No, I'm busy. Nehemiah, come meet. No, I'm busy. Nehemiah, come meet. No, I'm busy. Even you guys. I know I'm like this sometimes. When you get exasperated because somebody keeps asking the same thing, you think maybe if you change your response and try and tell them a different way, it might help. Guess what? You just got distracted. Parents, this is one, like it's hard, but this is one that it provides deep satisfaction, at least for me. When my kids say, hey, can I do something? No. Why? And I tell them, well, because this and this. And they say, yeah, but what about this? I say, no, because this and this. And then they say, well, what about that? I said, we're not talking about that. I said, no, because of this and this. And at one point, if they're smart, they stop. If they're not, they keep going, and that's where I find enjoyment in it, because guess what? Now I just repeat myself. Because I stay focused. I don't get distracted. Okay, so there's your little parenting tip / when life is terrible and you just want to give in or give up. And so now we look here and we see in verse 5. In the same way, Sanballat, for the 5th time, sent his servant to me with an open letter in his hand. Now here's what you got to understand. I didn't know this until I started reading it. When you go and you send a letter to somebody, back in the ancient Near East, here's what they do. You know, they'd put a seal on it kind of thing, like this is for you, it's only for you, and read it. Okay, well now when you send an open letter, it's kind of like everybody knows your business, and so it's added pressure. And so now Sanballat, in the same way, for the 5th time, sent his servant with an open letter in his hand, and in it was written, it is reported among the nations. And Geshem also says it. Remember Geshem, one of the bad guys. Geshem also says it, that you and the Jews intend to rebel. And that's why you're building a wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. So now he is accusing him of, starting a riot, causing problems, that he wants to put himself in charge. He's going to have a coup. In verse 7, not only that, you have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem, there's a king in Judah. And now the king will hear of these reports. So now, come and let us take counsel together. I mean, you can almost hear Sanballat's voice. Maybe you can't, but it's been reported that you are intending to rebel. I mean, when I picture this, I picture Mufasa. Actually, not Mufasa, Scar. You know, the bad lion. That's what I picture. I picture that voice. Okay, you see how this works? Are there people in your life that are doing the same thing to you? Maybe it's not a voice coming from outside. Maybe it's coming from inside. And it's telling lies to you. Then I said to him, saying, no such thing as you have said has been done. You are inventing them out of your mind. Okay, so what do we learn from this? If you're trying to figure out if you should give up or you should give in, you might get distracted. You don't want to get distracted. You want to stay focused. Nehemiah was able to say, hey, look, I'm not coming to meet with you. I got business. I'm not coming away from it. This is what's important. Okay, well, here, what do you do if you've been lied about? If you've been lied about, it's easy to want to give up and give in. Okay? Now, we're generally talking in relational terms here. Anybody who's gone through middle school has experienced this, probably firsthand, because that's where you start hearing on a regular basis, he said, she said kind of stuff. Did you hear what so-and-so said about so-and-so? No, I didn't hear that, but I heard what so-and-so said about them. I can't believe they did that. And the next thing you know, there's this whole story built up about somebody. And then they start getting harassed, and we read about this on a pretty, unfortunately, regular basis where people are bullied. Because somebody will jump on their Facebook or on their Twitter or on their Instagram, or they'll send out Snapchats or whatever it is, and they'll say, hey, so-and-so did this. They just literally make stuff up. Now, we've all experienced this for the last few months in election season. It's up to you to figure out what's true and go and do your homework. But at the end of the day, every candidate was lied about, mischaracterized. You are intending to do this, and people are going to hear about it, so vote for me. Like, we've heard this. What are you supposed to do if that's you, though? Because, look, I'll tell you, I'll just be honest with you guys. Those of you who have stuck around, you remember back when Discovery had 2 services going, we had a few other staff people, and things, it went boom. There were people who had things to say about me. I know what they were saying, and I knew it was 100% wrong. It hurts. There were times that I sat at home, and my wife and I talked, and she's like, are you sure you just don't want to quit? Like, I can go get a job, which is great, because she's a nurse, and she can. It's not easy. Like, you literally, depending on the desperation, how desperate are you to make sure that the truth is known? How difficult would it be to correct the lies that are out there? Okay, so if you've been lied about, it might put you in a place where you want to just throw in the towel. What does Nehemiah do? What can we learn from him? Nehemiah, he didn't care because he knew the truth. It didn't matter what they were saying about him. He knew who he was and what he was doing, and he knew that God had sent him out there. And so in verse 8 where he says, then I sent to him, saying, no such thing as you say have been done. You are inventing them out of your own mind. You are making it up. Now, he happened to have an audience, but there are going to be times where you are lied about. You just need to know the truth. And we know that Jesus said, hey, you will know the truth, and the truth will do what? Set you free. Set you free to continue on whatever it is that you feel called to finish. Okay? So, I'm just looking at Nehemiah going, is it not bad enough that he has to go from living in the king's palace to a broken down city? Okay, again, I have a picture of the Lion King. You remember when they showed up with Pumbaa and Timon, and they're showing up there and they're looking with Simba, and what does Timon say? Talk about your fixer-upper. He's just looking at it because the whole place is destroyed. This is Nehemiah, just comes from a grand place where he serves at the pleasure of the king, and now he's in Jerusalem. The walls are broken down. It's been burned with fire. People don't know what's going on. And he starts to do the work, and they're mocking him and making fun of him, and they're lying about him, and they're lying about the materials, and they're lying about the job, and now they're lying about him again, saying, okay, hey, look, it's done. But now we know why, because you want to rebel. No, none of this is true. It's your own invention. He knew the truth, and it set him free to do what he needed to do. So whatever lie is rolling through your head or rolling through your ears, You don't focus on that. Don't get distracted by that. You focus on the truth. Now let's go a little bit further, okay? A little bit further. Remember that opposition, okay, Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, they're not designed to encourage, okay? And temptation isn't motivated by love as much as it is by fear. Like, they're there to cause a problem. What happens in verse 9? Okay, this is just the summary of their accusations, their letters, they're intending to harm them, they're lying about them. Here's what he says. For they all wanted, now this is Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, and all their enemies from verse 1. They all wanted to frighten us, thinking their hands will drop from the work and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. Okay, I don't mean, like, I know for some people, you're more non-confrontational. Like, you will do whatever you can to smooth things over, to make sure that nobody's feelings are hurt. You're a peacemaker. And then there are others of you who are just incensed when things are not right, and you feel like somebody needs to say something, and so you just jump. This is me. You just kind of jump in and you say something, and sometimes it's not the nicest thing, and you hurt people's feelings, and you're like, but deal with it because it's true. Okay? That's sometimes how I feel. I'm just giving you an insight into my wickedness. Thank you for Jesus. Here's what I want to throw out there, though. When we read this, they all wanted to frighten us. People on both sides of that may be frightened, but typically those who are peacemakers are more frightened. And I've heard conversations before, it doesn't matter the circumstance, but where people they've been wringing their hands. Oh, should I say anything? What should I say? How can I do this? When you know that somebody needs to hear a painful truth, but you don't want to tell them. And the reason you don't want to tell them isn't because it's not true. You know it. It's because you're afraid. You're afraid. And we all get afraid. That is the whole reason that Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem were coming against Nehemiah and all of their people and accusing them of things, because they thought if they were afraid, what would happen? Thinking their hands will drop from the work and it will not be done. Satan's one of his best tools is to make you afraid, but Jesus came to love. We hear this all the time. We know it. God is love. Perfect love casts out fear. Like, it's an opposite kind of mentality. And so it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be afraid. You might want to give up because you're afraid. You're afraid about how difficult it's going to be to continue. You're afraid that it might be too much and you might actually die. I don't know what you're doing. I hope that's not the case. But if that's where you're at, it's okay to be afraid. It's okay if you're being tempted to just give in and to conform and to look like everybody else and do what everybody else is doing, and you just, like, I don't know if I want to say this because, I could get fired for saying that I'm a Christian. Teachers deal with this a lot. Like, how do I say that? I don't know if I can. Or people in their workplace don't necessarily want to share what the truth is because you're afraid. And it's okay to be afraid. But what does Nehemiah say? Said it was their intent to scare us, to make us afraid, so that our hands would drop from the work. That's what he says. But now, O God, strengthen our hands. Okay, so here's how I'm going to put that. Okay? I'm going to explain it to you too. But here's how I'm going to put it. When you're afraid, the best way to move past that is to be filled. And I don't mean to be filled with some false pride or bravado, like, oh yeah, we can overcome this, God's on my side. It's true that God's on your side, but you don't have to be all cocky about it. Here's what I mean by filled. When you look in Ephesians chapter 5, it says, do not get drunk on wine. Instead, be filled with the Holy Spirit. Why? Well, when you're drunk with wine, what controls you? The stupidity of the wine, and you act like an absolute fool. Now, we might laugh at people who are drunk, and if you want a good laugh, go on YouTube when you get home, type in Donald Trump drunk, and all you have to do, what people have done is taken his speeches and they just play it at half speed. And Donald Trump sounds like he is drunk. And it's funny. Trust me. And when somebody's drunk, they just get out of control. They don't have any of their own faculties. They're just doing stupid stuff. Do not get drunk on wine. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. So what would be the instead comparison? If you're filled with the Spirit, you're controlled by the Spirit. In other words, you don't have to manufacture, when you're afraid, you don't have to manufacture some courage. You have to be filled with it. It's something that comes from God. Oh, God, strengthen my hand. Nehemiah knows it. He's like, hey, God, I can't do this. Maybe you can. Just this morning we were talking about the fruits of the Spirit as we were praying for you guys. And it says, walk in the Spirit and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Sometimes the desire of the flesh is to get away and get out of there and to be safe. Because it's a scary world. But you can walk in the Spirit and not gratify that desire. All right. So you kind of following how Nehemiah knows what needs to get done. He's got people coming against him, lying about him, threatening him, trying to make him afraid. He's still continuing on. He hasn't left. Got a couple more things we can learn from him. He's being assaulted. He's being opposed. But, start in verse 10. Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 10. Now when I went into the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, son of Maribel, it was confined to his home. He said, let's meet together in the house of God within the temple. Let's close the doors of the temple, for they're coming to kill you. They're coming to kill you by night. Okay, if you were scared before because they're saying mean things and that, the king might find out and believe it, okay, now you'd be scared for sure because, again, back in the ancient Near East, like, if somebody was going to kill you, they were really going to kill you. It wasn't just an expression. And so this guy is saying, hey, why don't we go meet in the temple because they're coming to kill you. They're coming to kill you this very night. But I said, should such a man as I run away? And what man such as I could go into the temple and live? I will not go in. Do you understand? You maybe don't. But let me just tell you that if you did not work in the temple, you could not go in the temple. You were to be killed if you did. I think I wrote down a couple verses here in my notes. Let me see if I can find them here. Yeah. So like in Numbers chapter 18, I'll just read it to you. I didn't put it in your notes or anything like this, but here's what it says. The outsider who comes near to the temple, not even in it, the outsider who comes near to the temple should be what? Put to death. Okay, so this doesn't seem like a very good trade to me. Nehemiah goes to somebody, he says, hey, we need to go to the temple. Let's go meet because they're coming to kill you. They're going to kill you this very night. They're going to kill me, but you want me to go to the temple so God can kill me. No plan. No deal. I will not go in. And verse 12, he says, I understood and I saw that God had not sent him, but he had pronounced the prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat, the bad guys, had hired him. For this purpose he was hired, that I should be afraid and act in this way and sin, and so they could give me a bad name in order to taunt me. Remember Tobiah and Sanballat, oh my God, according to these things they did. And also the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets who wanted to make me afraid. Like Nehemiah is having a tough go of it. You might want to give up. And you might want to give in if you've been threatened. If you've been threatened. Hey, if you say, like, again, this is a very popular brother and sister thing. If you say that, I will beat your butt. If you tell Mom, I swear what I'm going to do to you. These are things that happened at my house when I was young. Like I've told you before, some of the times my brother and I got in a fight, like he was mad crazy. Okay? I've never seen him really around here. My parents called it a rock garden. You have a rock garden. Basically, it was all the, plants of landscaping, and then there's like these river stones that are in it. And so we were out playing basketball, and he broke something in the barn. Like, I'm telling Mom, I'm telling Dad when he gets home, I'm threatening him. Like, no, you're not. Oh, yes, I am. So I take off running. I can't run faster than rocks. That little sucker picked up these, and they're not little rocks. They're not like the little landscape rocks that you guys see around here, little pebbles and stuff. No, they're rocks. He's chucking them at me. Luckily, he missed. But I'd been there before where he threatened me. I told you about the time he chased me around with a hammer. Kind of makes you want to quit, right? Fine, you win. Okay, I won't do it. I won't tell. Because you're throwing rocks at me, you're going to, claw my head in with a hammer. You 8-year-old bully. Okay, Nehemiah is being threatened. Maybe you've been threatened. I don't know what's going on. Maybe you're trying to make things right, and somebody says, look, don't say anything. I don't want anybody to know. Maybe you've been threatened if you don't participate in something. You just want to give in to it. Look, if you don't do this, this is what happens in hazing in college. Some guy's trying to join a frat or some girl's sorority, and it's like, if you want to be a part of this, you have to do this. If not, and then they threaten him. Now, let's just deal with reality of what's going on right now. It might not be your life, but here's what's happening in the world around us. There are people who feel threatened by Donald Trump and a Donald Trump presidency. They hear that the KKK is holding a rally in North Carolina, and they feel threatened. We cannot just say, oh, you shouldn't feel threatened. They're stinking feeling threatened, and it's legitimate. And so you don't just dismiss them. In the same way that you wouldn't say to me as I'm running from my brother who's throwing rocks at my head, you wouldn't say, whoa, just slow down, man. Why don't you just turn around and tell him to stop? Because that'd be stupid, and I'd get hit with a rock. Like, it's legit. There are people who feel threatened by the opposition to Donald Trump and his presidency because there are riots in the street. And there are people that are setting things on fire and throwing stuff and attacking police and all that kind of stuff, and they feel threatened by it, and it's legitimate. It's a legitimate reason to feel threatened by rioters, people who are out of control. Okay, so what we don't want to do is just say, that's just them. And what I'm trying to tell you is when you feel threatened, you don't have to just go, oh, it's just me. You can look at what Nehemiah does. Because the threats didn't go away. Sanballat and Tobiah actually hired people to increase them and just say what they were trying to do, which is kill them. So what are you supposed to do if you're threatened? Okay, well, women, you probably know this. If you're walking to your car with in a dimly lit parking lot at night, what do? You make sure you have your mace out. You make sure that you put your keys in your fingers so you can stab them in the eye if they come. Here's what you are. You pay attention to what's around. You're just aware. You're just aware. And so if you want to stick to it, if you don't want to give up, you don't want to give in, but you're being threatened, the threats aren't going anywhere. You simply just need to be aware. Nehemiah was aware. You look at verse 12. I understood. I saw that God hadn't sent him, but they pronounced this prophecy because they were hired. He was aware. He knew what was going on. It didn't change it. He's like, oh, well, this is why it's happening. They want to kill me. They want to kill me. And they hired him to say that they want to kill me. Man, this is, okay, now I know. And I bet he was kind of careful at that point, wasn't he? You can see in verse 14. God, would you remember these guys and all that they did? In other words, be aware. God, pay attention to everything that they've done. And so Nehemiah goes, and you can see as you read through the rest of this chapter that the wall is finished completely in 52 days. That's a huge deal. I mean, it's pretty impressive that they did that. And people were upset about it. All right. Just end with this. We got one left. You might want to give in. You might want to quit. You might not want to push through whatever struggle you're going through with your kids, your spouse, your parents, your family, your friends. You might not want to, I'm done. I don't want to do it anymore. And it might be because you got distracted. It might be because you've been lied about. Maybe you've lied to yourself. It might be because you're just afraid. It might be because you feel threatened. Like, I'm never going to get through this. It's going to get worse. Okay, but there are things that you can do. You can stay focused. You can know what the truth is so that you don't get distracted. You can stay filled by God's strength and not just yours. Stay aware of the things that have gone on in the past and what God is doing now and what needs to happen in the future. Those are all true. But here's kind of the last thing to make sure of. Nehemiah gets the wall built. Everybody hears it, and now they're afraid. They tried to scare him into stopping, and now all these other nations are hearing about it, and they're afraid. And people, some are celebrating and some aren't. I just want us to think through something. If you feel like quitting, if you feel like stopping, if you feel like giving in or anything like this, just be careful that you don't think you're finished too soon. Because here we are at the end of chapter 6, and Nehemiah and the people have finished the wall. It was built in 52 days, and you'd think that was it, right? Nehemiah showed up. He's done his job. All right, hey, I heard about it. The walls are broken. I'm going to go to Jerusalem, and I'm going to build them. So he goes. He checks it out. He gives a plan. They work the plan. The wall's built, and he's done, right? No. No. When the wall had been built, verse 7 or chapter 7, and I set up the doors and the gatekeepers and the singers and all of these kinds of stuff, he put somebody in charge of it. And then what they did is they made sure that the doors were only open for a little time to keep the people who were now afraid but also hated him out, to keep them safe. And you can see in verse 4, the city was wide and large, but the people within it were few. And no houses had been rebuilt. So the wall's built, but there's not very many people there to protect the city anyway, and there's no place to live even if they were there. The job isn't done. Nehemiah can't quit. He can't stop. He can't say, okay, we're done. What does he do? Look at verse 5. Some of you might need one of these moments on your own. Verse 5, chapter 7. Then my God put into my heart to assemble the nobles and the officials and the people to be enrolled by genealogy. And I found the book of the genealogy of those who came up at first, and I found written in it, and then he just goes on, all the names of the people, same that we saw in Ezra, who get to go and live in the city. If you think you're finished, you might give up too soon. What are you supposed to do? Stay available. And I'm not saying available to other people. I'm saying look at what Nehemiah did. He was available to hear from his God. Then my God put into my heart. You might want to quit. You might want to give up. You might want to be finished. And God's not done with you yet. You might think that let me give you a perfect example because this ties into what it means to disciple other people. Many of us think that when we finally figure something out for ourselves, that we're finished. When I learn how to pray, I finally understand it. Good, I'm finished. When I finally learn how to walk in the Spirit and not gratify the desires of the flesh, that's great because now I'm finished. When I learn how to love my spouse the way that Christ would have me to do it, husbands, love your wives. Wives, respect your husbands. When I finally do that right, I must be finished, right? I've arrived. This is how we think. When I don't give in to these temptations, and I've learned how to say no, how to protect my heart, how to protect my eyes, whatever it is that you're going, and you don't sin that way anymore, you think you're finished. No. When Jesus showed up here to come to our rescue, he wasn't finished. He was just getting started. And what did he say? Come follow me and I will make you fishers of men. So, if you've gone through something, maybe your marriage has hit a rocky point and you've fixed it and things are better in your marriage now, it's not finished. Now it's just starting, and here's what it's starting for. You need to stay available for somebody else who's going through the same thing. You've found yourself sinning in certain ways and you've figured out God's done a work in your heart, you've confessed it, you've put in safeguards, whatever it is, God's taken away that desire and you think you're finished. You don't struggle with that anymore. No, you're not. You need to stay available to help somebody else learn to overcome the same thing that God has helped you overcome. You see what I'm saying? God will put it into your heart. This is what discipleship looks like. Whatever it is that you have already learned, you pass on to somebody else. Be available. Stay available. And you just look and you can go through and it's got all the names and everything and it just ends back here. You go to verse 73. All the people are there. They've taken a collection. They've got all kinds of riches now, and it's kind of good. And in verse 73, so the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, some of the people, the temple servants, and all of Israel lived in their towns. And then this last sentence. And when the 7th month had come, the people of Israel were in their towns. Do you know that from Nehemiah hearing to all of this happening wasn't even a year? Nehemiah, a year before this, was in the king's palace. He didn't even know. But Nehemiah was available. He did not get distracted. He did not give up. He stayed focused. He knew what the truth was. He was filled, aware. He knew. And so he didn't give up and he didn't give in. Look, we've got tough times coming, folks. Whether it's politically, whether it's church-wide, who knows? Maybe it's in your family, but tough times are coming. Don't give up. Do not give up. Don't give up. Don't give in. Can I pray for you? Can I pray for you to live like Jesus? I'm just going to listen. I want you to listen to what God may say. And if you haven't heard him before, it's maybe because you haven't been trained. Okay? God often sounds like a still small voice. He often sounds like this random thought that pops into your head, like, where did that come from? Sometimes it's God, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just you're hungry, or sometimes it's just you. But we pay attention to those things because sometimes it's God. Take a second and just listen. What does God have to say to you that you don't need to quit? You don't need to give up. You don't need to give in. What is he trying to encourage you with? Father, I pray for these people. I pray that, God, that you would open their eyes to see you. That you would encourage them in the difficulties. Because all of us face times where we want to just quit. And so, God, would you give them a renewed strength? Would you remind them that you are for them? And if our God is for us, who can ever be against us? Speak louder than any of the thoughts in our head, God. Remind us of how good you are. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.